everybody. I'm gonna talk to NetScaler on cloud-based systems like Azure and AWS. Who am I? First thing. I'm Carsten Bruns, working with Sepago since 5 or 6 years. I'm head of Competence Center Citrix, so I already know something about Citrix. I'm one of our IT architects. I'm a Citrix technology advocate. Woo! Yeah, a really cool community award which was released early this year, I think. Yeah, it was early. Was it?
Yeah, it started at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, right. So it's a new program, some of you, us, as well.
Well, sorry, what do you mean?
No, you're CTP or CTP?
Yeah, CTP.
Okay.
So he's like, you know the level which you see.
Low level. So, I'm 33 years old. I like barbecues and cooking, some photography and skiing. So these are my hobbies. If you want to contact me, this is my Twitter handle. I'm writing some blogs, and if you want to direct reach me, you can just send me an email. It's the easiest way. So, what will I talk about in the next 30, 40 minutes? I will give a short overview. Then I will talk a little bit of NetScaler on Azure, and afterwards I will tell something about NetScaler on AWS. And the last thing is maybe a little discussion with you, what you think. I will tell something about use cases and what I've implemented for my customers. So I've got some customers running NetScaler on cloud-based systems. Maybe I can tell you something about what I've done with them and what will work and what won't work. So that are the things I'd like to talk about. There are some general deployment guidelines of cloud-based NetScaler systems. So what should I do on Azure or AWS to deploy a NetScaler? It's not that easy like I have to deploy a VPX on my VMware or Hyper-V. I'd like to talk a little bit about scalability and high availability on cloud-based NetScaler systems. I will also talk about the limitations. So it is not a full-blown NetScaler on cloud-based systems. That's the first thing you need to know. It's not a full-blown NetScaler. There are some missing features. And as I already mentioned, I'd like to talk a little bit about use cases. So let's start with some interesting stuff. Let's start with NetScaler on Azure. First things you should know, NetScaler on Azure is running in a single IP mode. Does anybody knows what it is? Great. Come on, wake up! So nobody knows. Really easy, but it's really that what is written there. Your NetScaler will only have one IP address. It's easy.
Alright.
So you will have one IP address for management. You will have one IP address, the same actually, IP address for all your V servers, for NetScaler gateway, for all your load balances, will be always the same IP address. Esther?
Carson, does that mean that you're kind of using content switching on your NetScaler from the traditional configuration, or is Microsoft doing something to do like address translation to get that one IP?
A really good question, and I will talk about it later.
Perfect.
Great. So Esther wants to know if we are doing some content switching stuff on NetScaler, or if Microsoft is doing some stuff, and I will figure it out a little bit later. So this is very important to know because if you start the NetScaler on Azure, it will come up with an IP address, with a public IP address, and you can reach it on port 443. So if you want to set up a NetScaler gateway, on which port is it running?
The same one.
Thank you. Okay, I will talk about it a little bit later. We have some requirements on Azure. What you need to do first before you deploy a NetScaler. This is a resource group. You need. This is a kind of where we put in all your virtual machine, all your networking stuff, and this is needed in Azure. It's just a bunch of things. You need, if you want to set up something like high available or something which is scalable, you need an availability set. I will show it later, but you need it. Just remember, you need this one. And you need, of course, a virtual network where you can connect your NetScaler into. Another important thing, Azure is only licensed by your own license. So you can deploy your NetScaler and you will have to bring your own license. So same as you deploy VPX or in your own data center, you have to license this VPX. It's the same on Azure. Questions so far? Okay. Let's talk about creating this virtual machine. So I figured out that there are only two types which are really good for NetScaler on Azure. This is DS2 version 2. Yeah.
Isn't there a NetScaler in the Azure store?
Yeah. It is, but you have to choose your type of your machine.
Okay.
So if you want to create a machine on Azure, you go to your marketplace and type in Citrix, and you will get a deployment package of NetScaler, and you can choose it, and there's an image that will be automatically deployed to your Azure account. So, and after this, you have chosen it, you have to choose which size does my machine have. And therefore, we have DS2, which is actually, just give me 1 second, it's much easier. You will have this sign on your screen, and you can choose how much hardware do I need for my NetScaler. So you can use this one, and you will get 1 core and 3.5 gig of RAM and so on. The best one, I figured out, if you have some kind of workload on your NetScaler, you need to have 2 CPUs at least. One for the packet engine, one for management. So you need to use this one. If you want to have a cheaper one, you can use A2 machines, which is about 10 euros cheaper. But very important thing, use standard machines. Do not use basic machines. If you use basic machines, you are not able to use Azure load balancing features. And you need them. It's very important. So I've got one customer who said, okay, let's take basic machines because they are much cheaper. You pay only the half. But it won't work. I will tell you why. First of all, you need your availability group. It's a setting in Azure you can't change after creating your machine. So you have to set it right here. If you don't set it, you will not be able to put two NetScalers in one Azure load balancer. Why to use a load balancer on Azure, I will tell later. But this is very important. You have to set it right here. If you don't, you can delete your machine and deploy a new one. Last thing again, bring your own. So let's talk about interesting things like single IP mode. I mentioned it, you will have one IP address. The next thing is, sorry, you have one IP address and you have one public IP address which is translated to your NetScaler. This is how Azure is working. So your NetScaler will have a private IP address and Azure will host the public IP address. To connect your services running on the NetScaler, you need to use a network load balancer based on Azure. This is what Esther just asked, how to connect my services to the internet. So you need to use an Azure thing, it's called load balancer, ALB, and you can configure in this load balancer port address translation. So you have a public IP address which is listening on DNS record on ports 443, and you will create a nothing rule on your Azure load balancer to configure this one to give the traffic to your NetScaler on port 444, something like this, or 10444. So this is what you have to do to get it up and running. Yeah.
So can you assign multiple public IP addresses on the Azure load balancer? Is that the idea? Or
No,
also one?
it's also one, but you can create multiple Azure load balancers.
Oh, more load balancers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in my opinion, it's the only way it will work with a lot of services running on your NetScaler. You have to use content switching on NetScaler, so you have to mix it up. You will use Azure load balancer, which is connecting to your NetScaler on port 444, and there you configure content switch with running a universal gateway and the load balancing services, so that you have a mixed setup. Does it answer your question, Esther?
Yes, thank you very much. Now I understand it.
Cool. So we talked about this. There's one really important thing you need to know. I needed 3 hours, so shame on me. If you create your Azure load balancer on port 444 and you think, oh, everything's running, my DNS record is up and running, cool thing. But there's a security group based on your NetScaler, what traffic will be coming to my NetScaler. So the NetScaler need a security group, which is where some security rules, and within you need to create a rule which is for your services running on the NetScaler. So on port 444, you have to create this rule to that the traffic will not be dropped on the NetScaler before it comes to the NetScaler. So there are some security features running on Azure, and you have to configure them. It's very important to know. So let's talk about limitations. Are there any questions? Do you understand how to deploy a NetScaler on Azure?
Kind of sounds complex because there is a big part outside of your NetScaler configuration that you now have to configure as well to comply to the Microsoft standards for Azure. So will that limit the functionality that the NetScaler can provide, or is it just making sure that you have all these complex pre-configurations set up and then you can use your NetScaler just like you're used to using your NetScaler in an on-premises situation?
Yes and no.
Thank you. That clarifies it all.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, it is really a little bit complex, but if you understand how Azure is working, so that you need availability sets, that you need security groups, that you have to configure load balancing and some different public IP addresses and your routing and so on and so on. It's really easy. It's much easier than in your data center. But because think of your data center, you will not deploy a NetScaler in it without talking to firewall guys, without talking to networking guys. So, and here you can do it all on your own. You don't need a firewall guy to configure the Azure firewall.
I like that.
So this could be much easier. When we talk about AWS, this will be much more complex. So this is the easier part.
Okay, that's interesting.
And yes, you asked about limitations depending on how this NetScaler is deployed here. Yes, there are a lot. As you can see, we have no clustering. We have no IP version 6. We have no layer 2 modes. So everything on layer 2 doesn't work. Because Azure will give you a service up from level 3.
Okay.
The main pain in VS is global server load balancing. So you will not get global server load balancing on Azure.
And why is that?
I don't know. Just because it's not there. I tried to figure it out why. I found no reason, but in your deployment package running on Azure from the marketplace, you will get a version without global server load balancing. I have no clue.
Why? Have you asked it to Citrix about this?
Not yet.
Yes, sir.
So, and there's no documentation about updating. So if you have deployed your NetScaler and you want to do an update, just like, no. Don't do it. Just let it run. If you want to update, deploy a new one. That's it. It's really strange. So you cannot use the updates from the Citrix page website. So will not work because it's a special firmware running on it. So there's no way to update the NetScaler at this time.
So it's a fixed build that you always get.
Yeah.
So whenever they update it, you'll get the new updates from guys.
Yeah. And if you want to update, you have to create a new one. That's not nice. Further questions about Azure and NetScaler on Azure? Okay. Then let's talk a little bit about AWS. It will be a little bit more complex because on AWS you will have a multi-home NetScaler running. So this is not a single IP mode. This is a multi-homed NetScaler, so you can configure multiple interfaces, multiple IP address concerning two interface. So it's much more complex to get this up and running. Next point, which is really important to know, you need VPC mode on your Azure account. There are two modes you can run AWS. It's EC2 classic mode, so old stuff, and EC2 VPC mode. That's the new stuff. If you create a new account, you will always get VPC mode. If you have got an old one, you have to update this account. You need these two things. The first one is an elastic network interface. I don't know why it's elastic, because it's interface. I think it can't be elastic. And the second one is elastic IP address. This is your public IP address. Your private IP address is not a rule based on Azure. You need also security groups. They are much more detailed than in Azure, therefore much more complicated. And you have two different types of licensing. So you can bring your own license, or you can buy a license based on Azure. So you can pay per month. So you can choose in Azure Marketplace your VPX, like VPX 10, and you pay this license per month based on usage. So it's more interesting thing than in Azure, I think. So let's create a machine on AWS. We have more types of machines you can use for your NetScaler environment. I hope you can read it. So this is the same. You have your CPUs, your memory, and you can choose if you want a machine called M3 or M4. What you don't see on this screen, and also not on the website, M3 machines and M4 machines have different numbers of IP addresses you can bound to the interfaces. So if you want to use an M3 machine, you can connect one interface, one of your elastic network interfaces, and you can configure 15 IP addresses to this interface. If you use M4 machines, you can connect one elastic network interface, and you can connect 10 IP addresses to the interface. So there's a documentation of this on the internet, but you have to, it's raining crazy in Rome. Make sure that you choose the right machine, depending on how many IP addresses, how many interfaces are going to need. Storage will be defined separately. So in Azure, you will have a fixed storage depending on your machine, and in AWS you can add the storage like you want. So this is a little difference between them. I think storage is not important for NetScalers, only for the configuration. I figured out if you use magnetic disks, it will freak you out because it's very, very slow when you configure it, but the NetScaler is running it very well because the NetScaler only uses CPU and RAM, and not really hard disk. You've got some details you have to configure about your network. This is very important to set this network. This is your first adapter, your first elastic network interface. You have to set it to your private network. If you don't, you will never connect to your NetScaler via your public headquarters. I figured it out, tried it, it won't work. If you don't set it to private, you have to delete it and create a new machine with private. So please use your private subnet. Licensing again, already talked about it. So Azure is really simple to deploy NetScaler. In AWS, it's much more complicated because you can have multiple network interfaces connected to your NetScaler, so you can do it like in your own data center. You can have a management interface, you can have interface running in public IP addresses, you can have interfaces running your subnet IP addresses for backend communication, so that you can design a multi-home NetScaler, and it's much more complex because you have to create multiple security rules concerning to the elastic network interfaces and which ports are running on which interface, so you have to create all these stuff. And you can also create a NetScaler running only one interface with multiple IP addresses, so you have to make good architecture on what you will do with your NetScaler running on AWS. It's much more complicated than in Azure, I think. In my opinion, AWS, so Amazon, tried to design a platform where you can rebuild your DMZ so that you have multiple interfaces with multiple subnets and so on and so on. And this will not be possible on Azure. So, but the question is, do you want it? Do you want to create DMZs in your cloud infrastructure, or do you want to use it as a service? Questions about deploying?
More questions about kind of your use cases in terms of your NetScalers. Like, are you just using them as NetScaler gateways, or are you doing more complex kind of work?
Just give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
I will come up to
Okay.
this
Perfect.
later.
Thank you.
So just a little bit about the limitations. So in AWS you can use global server load balancing. This is very important to know because depending on global server load balancing, you can build up your high availability or scalability of NetScalers running in AWS. In Azure, you have to use your Azure load balancer to build up your high availability and to build up your scalability. So in AWS, you can use global server load balancing based on NetScaler to do this. You have to do it because I don't find a really good load balancer based on AWS you can use for this. You can use I think they have a redware, something like this. or can load balancer based on AWS, but I think it will not work. So to talk a little bit about high availability. First thing you should think about is there a need for me to have high availability on a high availability cloud-based system? So do I need to create an HA pair of NetScalers in my cloud system? In my opinion, you don't need to. I think it's much better to create GSLB running on 2 different data centers in AWS. So you have high availability over data centers of AWS, and also you have more performance because you have active configuration of 2 NetScalers. And in Azure you have got one limitation more. You can't create HR pairs based in Azure. Feature is not running because it's based on layer 2, so you can't create it. And in Azure you have to use the Azure load balancer. If you use it, you will have high availability, and you will also have the scalability you want to have because they are also in an active mode. So let's talk about a little bit of use cases. I told about my customers running some NetScalers on cloud-based systems. So for what are they using the NetScaler? The interesting thing is the customer who are using Microsoft Azure and running their NetScaler, they are using NetScaler Gateway. And the customer who's using AWS is using load balancing. So I don't know if there are some things between, but this is what I figured out. So NetScaler Gateway feature is only useful, thank you, is only useful if you running your XenApp and XenDesktop also in the cloud. Because if you don't, you will have a cloud-based NetScaler which is connecting to your data center and using all the ports you use to your virtual machines and your PDAs. So this is not really interesting because of the latency. You have a really big latency. So if you want to use NetScaler Gateway on cloud-based systems, make sure that you use XenApp and XenDesktop also cloud-based.
Would you not be better off than just using Citrix Cloud?
Sorry.
Would you not be better off just using Citrix Cloud then? Because you've got the NetScaler Gateway as part of your infrastructure anyway.
Maybe.
It's just a question.
Yeah. We can talk about it.
Oh yeah.
Sure. So the other point is to use NetScaler as the reverse proxy for web servers, which are based on your cloud system or on-prem. Both will work. I've configured a lot of load balancing on AWS-based NetScalers for web servers running in a data center. So with a big latency, and it will work. The reason I can tell you later.
But is it fun? Such a great.
It's really complex because you have to configure your security groups, you have to configure your network, and you have to configure your firewall settings on Azure or on AWS. In this case, it was AWS. You have to configure your VPN tunnel to your own data center. And you have also to configure all the stuff in your data center, so you have to do it twice. And no, it's not fun.
It's a long answer.
Yeah, sorry. What I think what is really interesting, and I talked about it a little bit, is global server load balancing based on AWS. So that you have to connect two data centers in different locations. And the last thing I have is a little bit of comparing it. I've tried to not really working well because you have two different deployment methods. So how to compare two different things? It's like, yeah, really complicated. So you have the network connection in single IP mode on Azure-based systems. You have multi-home configuration on AWS. And there's the answer. I think it's a way too complex to do this stuff because you have to do it twice, one time in your data center and one time on your own. So I think I will prefer Azure if you want to use easy deployment of your NetScaler. You have the licensing. I've already talked about it. About the sizing, I think AWS systems are much better fitting for NetScaler than the Azure things do. Because the machines on Azure and the sizing of these machines are not really good for NetScalers. So if you know about the sizing guide for PPX systems, you won't find them in the machines you can choose on Azure. The machines on AWS are a little bit better, I think. But the next point is, I think Citrix will build a new deployment package in Marketplace for Azure-based systems, which will fit much better than now. Okay, high availability and scalability I talked a lot about. So, do you have any questions? One offering, if you want to see something, because we are running out of time, I've everything with me, so we can have a look at AWS or Azure or what you want. So, thank you.